Column 2 is another option for digitizing those multi-stitch line elements. So just like column 1, just like complex fill, it used to be tied to the stitch type that you wanted, what kind of input tool you chose, but now that's pretty unlocked. You can choose pretty much any multi-stitch line stitch type to fill into a column 2 or column 1 or complex fill. It's how you like to digitize. Column 2s digitize a little differently than column 1s. Column 1s work with pairs of points. Column 2s, you do all of one side and then all of the other, and then you tell it where you want your stitch directions. Now both column 1 and column 2, they don't have holes, whereas a complex fill can have a hole and can have subregions. Neither one of the column tools have holes. So you digitize in pieces. I typically use a column 2 for digitizing my own lettering, a lot of my detail kind of satin stitch, the more sculptural pieces that I do, but a lot of that is habit. It's because it's what I've used before. Find the tools that work well for you, for what you're trying to do, and use those. It's really fairly open what tool you want to use for what type of stitch you want to use. I have open columns.bmp. That is loaded in the graphics folder, that's loaded in the designs folder with your software. It is a design that has a lot of shapes that lend themselves to the use of a column tool to digitize, and you can select that column 2 by clicking and holding for a half a second under the column flyout and choosing the one that says column 2 if you hover over it, but it's also the one that has the line on each side as opposed to the lines that go across the form. To start, we're going to digitize all of one side and then all of the other. So I'm going to start over here. I'm going to left click to start it. I'm going to go all the way up, all of one side, left click, and I hit enter, and then I get a connection, and that is the end of my column. So I'm going to left click to start this, left click to end it, and then when I press enter, it's going to complete that shape, but it's going to be asking for my stitch direction. Now let's take this out of 3D so you can see what's going on. If I like the stitch direction being used, I can click on the edge so that I'm on that line. I can click on that line and it will add a stitch direction to confirm that that's the stitch direction that I want. Now, if I didn't like it, I could edit it. I could delete that and click and drag across to add my own. And notice it's getting a little bit funny with my densities by giving this kind of odd stitch direction here. I like to keep my stitch directions trying to go pretty much across the form and as close to perpendicular to the edge as I can manage. So you digitize all of one side of an element, press enter, and then you digitize all of another side. And it does not have to have the same number. It does not have to be even. They don't have to match. When you're done, you press enter. It gives it a stitch direction to kind of fill in going between the ends, but you need to give it another one. You need to let it have a designated stitch direction rather than relying on its own. And you can give it more than one, and then when you're done, you can press enter and you're ready to still digitize yet another one because the tool stays selected. So let me delete that last one that we did. So let's look at creating some real shapes rather than that crazy one that I just did. I always start with a left click, and then I'm going to right click to create this curve. Left click for the end, hit enter. Here I'm going to do the same thing. Left, right, left, hit enter. And then I'm just going to confirm a stitch direction across that by clicking on that line. Now, for something like this, we've got a thick, thin, and when I did this with a column 1, let's change to pink so we can see a little bit better. When I did this with a column 1, I did it in pairs of points. So I had to have equal numbers. Now I don't. I can do a perfect arc on this side, and then without editing, I can come across this other side. And I can give it 2. If I needed 3, I could have done that. And now I've created that shape and I don't need to edit it. I just need to confirm my stitch direction. So I start on one end and I go across all of one side, hit enter, go back and do it in the same direction to the other side, hit enter, and then confirm the stitch direction. If I'm going to go again, I can drag another stitch direction across. If I'm not, I can hit enter to complete that shape. For more complex shapes, it's helpful to give yourself hash marks if you need them. You can do this in your head. Starting out, I find it much easier to put them on paper or on screen. I'm using vector lines to do them on screen. You saw me do this with column 1. These are the same lines. Now, this is where things get a little bit different. I'm using a column 2 this time, so I'm going to start on an end, and then right click, and I'm going to do all of one side. And this is where thinking all of the left side and then all of the right side doesn't really work, because as the form changes, it turns. What was the left side is now the right side, and what was the right side is now the left side, and that just gets really confusing. Press enter, and then I start over. I'm back over here, and I'm going to do it on the other side. Left, right. I'm dividing it up where these hash marks are. If I'm not right on them, that's okay. I'm going to left click for this transition between the straight and the curve. And then again to go back, right, right. And then here I'm going to left click, press enter. And this is kind of a good example of, wow, that's really not working well for me, because it's trying to go all the way from here, all the way to here, and I haven't given it a good stitch direction. If you give yourself these hash marks, it's also a good place to put in stitch directions, especially where they transition from that straight to the curve or the curve to the straight. I only had to put in those 2, and it really straightened out those stitches, and everything is fanning just like I would like it to. For something like this was an absolute nightmare with a column 1. With a column 2, I could digitize across the whole thing and try to get all that stuff lined up. Or, so I hit escape to delete it. I could just go across the top, go across the bottom, press enter to put in my stitches, give it a stitch direction, hit enter. I'm going to go back to my edit mode, and now I can just edit in all of these pieces. And now I know that those straight parts are completely even, completely level. I'm going to drag this down. I'm holding control to make it arc out perfectly. If you right click and get this menu, it means you're not on the line that you think you're on. So I'm going to right click to put in that curve point. I'm going to hold control as I drag it down to make it arc out perfectly. Here I'm just dragging it, and since everything's a straight point, it's going to be that nice triangle shape. And with everything being uneven and nothing matching at all, this column 2 makes this a lot easier. And if I don't love a stitch direction, I can go grab my stitch direction editing tool and tweak the stitch directions as I might prefer them. There. So now it's going throughout the form. I think I like that. For this kind of shape, this is just a deceptively difficult kind of shape to digitize. Here, thinking inside and outside rather than side A and side B is sometimes helpful. But I start with a left click. I'm going to divide this up because this curve gets a little bit difficult to deal with. And then don't be afraid of zooming in. If you don't like something, you can delete it by hitting backspace and then continuing on. So I press enter to finish that one side. Here, it is very important. If I did the first side counterclockwise, I need to do the second side counterclockwise as well. I don't want to bow tie it. If you misplace a point, press backspace and you can create a new one. And then for my stitch direction, I'm just going to drag across the middle here, and that will put them horizontally across there. And I think I like how that's fanning. So that works really well for me. So now we just need to deal with these shapes. So these shapes are a little more complex. I can't do them all at once. I can't do them in one piece. I have to do them in pieces. So you need to plan it out a little bit. What do I want to do first? What do I want to do second? Where do I divide it up? Now we have these nice blue marks from when we did this with the column 1 video. I think they'll work well for this. So I'm going to start here. I'm going to go inside all the way up. So all of one side, hit enter, go back and do it again. All of the other side. Hit enter to complete the form. And then I'm going to drag across there. So I did across the whole thing. I held Alt and it kept it locked to that 15-degree increment. I got those nice vertical stitch directions, not too far away from that corner. If you want to do it here, you can. And then to give myself a little bit of overlap, I'm going to drag that exit down because I want to do the middle piece. I'm going to add those points, add a curve point. I'm just going to drag this out a bit. And then I will start out here and walk back, and I'll stop a little early. This is another way to do this. We did one way with the column 1 where we came out from the middle. You could travel out and come back and give yourself a little bit of room. And then as this sews back towards itself, which not something I normally love doing, sewing back towards myself, but it will push just a touch. So I stop a little bit early and those stitches will push in. I'm going to move my entry point to the last stitch of the previous element and it'll generate that travel stitch, sew back, meet back up with itself and kind of just push that little bit extra, kind of nudge its stitches into place. For the A, I'll go up one side. And here, if you wanted, you could even give it the slight bow that it seems to have. And then come down. So we can cap this. 2 lines of overlap should be fine. If it's a little too much, I might edit it later. Give it a stitch direction, hit enter to continue on. I'm left clicking for all of those straight points. Hit enter, give it a stitch direction. I'm going to grab my editing tool. I'm going to drag my exit point up to here. Bring that in. Bring that in. Select this piece again, and then select my tool. Whenever I select an element and then select the tool, I will insert directly after whatever is selected. Across one side, hit enter. Across the other, hit enter. Give it a stitch direction, hit enter. And now we've got some lovely shapes made with a column 2. So I use column 2 when I want to set up my stitch directions separately from my input points, or I want to have very different number of input points on one side versus the other. And that gives me that flexibility, and it makes my elements easier to digitize and easier to edit if those are the case. If you want to, as you're digitizing, control the stitch directions, that's what column 1 is great at. It works in pairs of points, and the line connecting those pairs is your stitch direction. So you can create the stitch direction as you create the element.